Good morning. I'm Donald Combe, and I am the Sexton of St. Mark's Cemetery here in Niagara-on-the-Lake. We want to share with you some of the stories that we have about the people whose final resting place is this cemetery. This is the memorial tablet to the first rector of St. Mark's, Robert Addison. Addison was born in England and came to Canada in 1791. He died in 1829, and this memorial was placed in the cemetery to him. It also memorializes two of Addison's sons-in-law and one grandson. Neither Addison's wife nor his daughters are mentioned on the stone. It was produced by a man in Hamilton called Mr. Evans, considered the finest maker of stones of the period. About 10 years ago, it was decided that some of the graves in St. Mark's that had no marker should be marked and the story told. This is one of them. This is a monument to David Cowan, who was born in Scotland and was summoned to America by George Washington to be his gardener or landscape architect at Mount Vernon. Shortly thereafter, the War of Independence began, and George Washington thought that probably Mr. Cowan would be happier living under the British flag. So George Washington saw to it that Cowan had safe transportation to a place where the British flag flew. He came here to Ontario. He was a member of the first legislature, was instrumental in the transportation through the lakes of Mr. Simcoe, and died in 1808 in Fort Erie. We know that Mr. Addison conducted the funeral, and we know that his remains lie somewhere here in the grounds of St. Mark's. In this area lie Andrew Heron and his 4 wives. Andrew Heron was a significant member of early Niagara. He published the newspaper, he founded the library, very prominent and active in the life of St. Andrew's Church. You'll wonder why we have a Presbyterian buried in an Anglican cemetery. In the beginning, until the mid-1830s, this was the only cemetery in town, and it probably would have remained that way, except that the bishop had come and wondered why all the Presbyterians and Romans and Baptists were buried in the Anglican cemetery. When Fred Habermill and I were preparing the book Stone Saints and Sinners, we were looking through the cemetery for people who had some spectacular interest. And numerous times I walked by this stone and I continued to read. Down here it said, B. Handley Geary, V.C. And I thought, is this some sort of university degree that I've never heard of? And it was really quite a long time before it finally dawned on me that VC was Victoria Cross. Benjamin Handley Geary was born in England, and he served in the First World War with such distinguished service that he was awarded a VC. At the conclusion of the war, he became an Anglican priest and later moved to Canada, where he served for 24 years in the legislature in Toronto as the Sergeant at Arms. He was a very active part of St. Mark's and read and was active in the work of the parish. When he died, the unfortunate bit of the story was that his Victoria Cross medal, which lay on the top of the casket, was stolen. Thankfully, several years later, it was returned to the family and then presented to the War Museum in Ottawa, where it remains. This is a memorial to Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor, as a young lady, came to Niagara to visit friends who lived in the wilderness on King Street. And it happened to be the time that the Americans invaded the town in 1813, and the Americans said, you'll all have to get out of the house, we need the house. So they moved to the barn. a couple of days later, they came and said, well, I'm sorry, you've got to get out of the barn. We need the barn. So Elizabeth, her 4 children, and 40 of her closest friends spent the entire winter in the root cellar of the wilderness. She lived another 20 years, although I would have thought that the horror of spending all that time in the root cellar would have done her in. This is the monument to William McMurray. William McMurray was the 3rd rector of Niagara and an absolutely astonishing and incredible human being. He was born in Scotland, came to Canada, studied under Strawn, who later became the bishop. He was so young when he graduated that he couldn't be ordained, and so Strawn sent him off to Sault Ste. Marie to work among the native people. And while he was there, he met his wife to be Charlotte. She was the granddaughter of an Indian princess and a very, very important and significant woman. Charlotte helped him in the translation of parts of the Bible and the prayer book into native languages. While I was in Toronto doing some work in the archives at Trinity University, I came across a letter that had been written by Strawn, the mentor of William McMurray. This letter by Bishop Strawn was sent to Thomas Jefferson and to Madison following the War of 1812. And in this letter, Strawn went on for pages and pages berating the action done by the Americans and how totally wrong they were in the whole business of the War of 1812. This is the grave of Josiah Burr Plum, and this is the grave of his wife, Elizabeth Street. Josiah Burr Plum was born in Connecticut, made a great deal of money in Albany, and at the time of the American Civil War grew very, very disheartened by what was happening in the United States. And he wanted to move to a country and a place where sanity and rules and regulations existed. He saw Elizabeth Street at some point and he fell in love with her. So the story is he fell in love with the most beautiful street in the world. Her father was a millionaire, which I guess helped quite a bit. Josiah Burr Plum lived in a house on King Street in Niagara-on-the-Lake, the site of Parliament Oaks School. He became a member of the Parliament of Canada and then was appointed to the Senate, and he ended his life as the Speaker of the Senate of Canada. So it's a pretty good story for a little boy from Connecticut.